All right, Wheels, thanks again for doing this, man. Let's start with last night's game. If you were to break it down, you could say one team hit a bunch of singles and the other team hit a bunch of homers and obviously won the ball game.
Yeah, it was pretty much that simple, right? I mean, that was the difference. Three swings of the bat. And, that sounds like it's trying to make it sound less bad than it actually was, but really it's not. I mean, like that's the difference. It's a power game. Major League Baseball in 2021 is a power game. And, if you're not going to, as the guys like to say, if you're not going to get the line moving and kind of cluster all those hits together, it's tough to outscore the opponent when you have 15 base runners, but only one extra base hit. And, you had a couple of chances, right, with the bases loaded and two outs. One of them happens when your pitcher's coming up. And look, we all know Waino has been a good hitter for a pitcher, but I mean, it's still a pitcher, right? And then Harrison Bader gets called out looking with the bases loaded. I mean, they had some opportunities early in that game. They had less opportunity late, but when you're having a hard time, it seems like everything is a hard time, and that's kind of how it's gone because when they do get the home run, there's nobody on base.
How important do you think, especially with the loss last night, but these first couple series, Giants, Cubs, here we are a couple weeks from the trade deadline, and the Cardinals are 9 back in the division, 8.5 in the wild card. I mean, they have to do something pretty quick. They have a couple weeks to figure out what they're going to do the rest of the season.
I do. I agree. Mo's said a couple times, that if it's easier to make a deal that has longer term impact, right? It's easier to make a trade if you're getting something that could help you in the future. And I'm paraphrasing. It's not exactly what he said, but it's the idea. Like, I think they become less and less likely to pull off a rental if they don't gain some ground between now and the deadline, right? I mean, you don't want to give up long-term assets for 2 months essentially of a rental when you're 8 or 9 games out. Now, if you could pull off something that was a guy like, I mean, everybody talking about Kyle Gibson, right? I mean, we all like the idea. He's pitching well. Texas is probably going to look to move him. He's probably not going to be cheap, but he comes with another year, right? And when you look ahead to the rotation next year, you can see, all right, maybe you do end up needing one more starting pitcher in there. Because you don't know yet what's happening with Waino. You don't know what's happening with Kwon Young Kim, who's a free agent at the end of the year. You've got a few different circumstances you can navigate around. There's never an argument against a good starting pitcher. But, what's the cost? And then, what's the competition like? Because you've got a lot of teams looking for starting pitching, a lot of teams looking for bullpen help. And are you able to beat the asking or beat the offers from other team when it comes to the asking price?
Speaking of pitching, Mike Schilt had some updates yesterday. It does seem like there's some good news on that end with Jack Flaherty and Miles Mikolas potentially. When do you think we could see those guys back in the big leagues?
Well, I mean, if we're going based on kind of a spring training schedule, right? I mean, if you look at where they are now, they would probably be at the very beginning of spring, wouldn't you think? I mean, based on what we're hearing, Miles Mikolas threw a live BP yesterday. So live BPs are usually like the second week of spring training. It's like the day or two after position players report. So it's probably a bit, right? I mean, it may not be 5 or 6 weeks, but it's got to be at least 3 weeks, you would think. And, Flaherty sounds like he's a little bit further behind that. He threw a bullpen yesterday, but didn't face hitters and is not quite at that point. So you're probably looking, just conservatively first or second week of August as a best case scenario. Although they did say that Mike Schilt did say that Miles might be able to go out on a rehab assignment before the end of the month, which is good. The question is, though, like let's call it, what are we, 2 weeks out? Let's call it 2 weeks from the end of the month. In 2 weeks, is he going to be, ready to ramp up and make 2 rehab starts and come back? Or is he going to need 3 or 4 or what? I mean, it's an unknown, but if you're conservative, you're probably looking at 3 or 4 weeks.
And we're one game here past the All-Star break. So the second half of the season, when you look at the first half here for the Cardinals and how they played, how do you grade them? And when you're looking at, I mean, there's a ton of injuries, obviously, on the pitching side, especially starting pitching. Position player wise, they've had a couple guys banged up, but I don't think you can blame injuries as much on their lack of production there. So what do you think's going on? Is it on the hitters? A lot of people bring up Jeff Albert, and just overall, I mean, how do you grade the Cardinals here at the kind of halfway point-ish?
Just too many people have not played to the back of their baseball card. It would be nice to have the Tyler O'Neill in the lineup for the 18-19 games that he missed, right? I mean, he's been one of your best hitters. It would have helped to have him in there. Bader's missed a lot of time. So two of your main guys. And the problem here is, yes, the problem is that those two guys missed time, right? But the other problem was the guys that played instead of them didn't do anything, right? They really struggled. There wasn't a whole lot there to fill in behind them. So you went from guys that we were still trying to find out about to guys that really didn't bring a whole lot to the table. So I think what's happened is the underlying depth hasn't really stepped up, right? I mean, they've had a crazy number of injuries. I mean, there's no question. You wouldn't have anticipated losing Jack Flaherty like you did. Even if you anticipated some setbacks for Miles, you wouldn't have expected, well, he's going to pitch 4 innings and then you won't see him again for 4 months, right? I mean, like nobody would have expected in the offseason, Michaelis, you won't see him till August. That wasn't really kind of on the table. And KK with the early injury problems, like they've had a lot of those things. But when you take that out, which is a part of the problem, it's a big part of the problem. I mean, you can't diminish that. But other teams have had injuries too, right? Milwaukee's had injuries. Christian Yelich still really hasn't done a whole lot, and they've found ways with other guys to fill in. And it's the guys that came in to fill in that really haven't been ready to help out. And that's why you see, for example, the pitching staff leading Major League Baseball in walks and hit by pitch and wild pitches. The guys that stepped in aren't strike throwers. And then some of the guys you were counting on haven't had success in that regard either. And, you think about the guys that have struggled like Ponce, John Gant, Carlos before he went down. There were a lot of people that just were kind of scattered all over the place. And it's hard to me, Charlie, to know exactly with every team how much of this is just everything's still weird for these guys. Like everything, they're still trying to catch up on what was missed a year ago. And how much of it is just guys that weren't good enough. I think that's something that the teams will have to assess at the end of this season. And thankfully next year should be back to normal. But, the problem is the underlying depth wasn't ready to help. That really is probably the biggest thing. But it's all of it combined. If you have to pick one thing, I think you have to go with the pitching and the walk side. I mean, you're a team that's built on pitching and defense. Like that's been the signature for the Cardinals for a long time. They're not built to be an offensive juggernaut. That's not how the team is designed. The team is designed to play great defense and to pitch. And when one of those two things isn't there, when the pitching's not there, you can see that it disrupts everything, right? This lineup was going to be in a good case scenario, probably middle of the pack in Major League Baseball, right? I mean, that's kind of what I was hoping for. But preseason, I was like, all right, if they could just be middle of the pack offensively, the pitching and the defense should keep them at the top of the division. And unfortunately, that's not how it played.